Hello, everyone. I have something today that I think you will find interesting, perhaps controversial. This was a video that I really didn't want to make, but I'm seeing so much propaganda, lies, and misinformation out there that I felt it was my duty to at least point some of these things out, and hopefully these things that I share will land in the right ears. People will begin speaking out, and hopefully we can hopefully the situation in Ukraine with the Russian invasion will not escalate. But ultimately, civilization is on a certain course, and just how much we can control is uncertain. Let me say that while this video is titled I Do Not Stand with Ukraine, and we'll be discussing the reasons why, this is not a pro-Russian, or I should say pro-Putin video either. I have a balanced, middle of the line view on this, and my position is that the West, especially the United States of America, should stay out of this conflict. The Ukrainian people and the Russian people are pawns in a much bigger game that is going on here. And I would just encourage you, if you are like me, a Bible believing Christian, to pray for peace in Ukraine and a, an end to the current conflict. So, since the beginning of the Russian invasion into Ukraine, propaganda has been everywhere. Everywhere. It is absolutely outrageous, although ultimately we've seen propaganda over the last 2 years regarding several other topics. For example, the elections. For example, the pandemic. I've talked about that a little bit in some of my other videos. Not going to get into that here. So we know, those of us who are awake and paying attention, that propaganda is out there. My introduction to the problem of propaganda uh, revolved around this particular story of a jet being downed in a residential area of Kiev. And let me just say at the outset here, I'm an American. I've always pronounced Kiev as Kiev, and I've always spelled it this way. And maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. The spelling and pronunciation of this city's name is being hugely politicized online. People saying, "Oh, this pronunciation and spelling are pro-Russian. This pronunciation and spelling are pro-Ukraine." Um, I don't care. This is how I've always spelled it and always pronounced it, and that's how I will continue to do so. I'm an American, so I can be excused for my American pronunciations of a foreign city name. So don't read too much into that. But the story that first got my attention was of a military jet being downed in a residential area of Kiev. Um, I believe the three outlets were CNN, which is hard government propaganda, Fox News, which is soft government propaganda for conservatives, and an alternate news site called the Gateway Pundit. And these three websites were running different stories on the same event. And I'm a little fuzzy in my mind. It's been several weeks on this, and I didn't capture all three of these articles from all three of these websites. So I may have the websites a little bit mixed up. But the bottom line was the first story I read said that a Russian fighter jet had been downed by Ukrainian air defense systems. Yeah, Ukraine. That was the first story. The second story said no, it was actually a Ukrainian fighter jet and it had been downed by a Russian jet in a dogfight. And the third story said no, it was actually a Ukrainian fighter jet and it had been downed by friendly fire, Ukrainian friendly fire. The only thing these three stories agreed on was that the jet was down in a residential area of Kiev. And seeing this from the outset made me realize right away everybody's going to be lying in this conflict. Everybody's going to be lying. And let me just say, and I say this in as loving and well-meaning of a tone as I possibly can. If your only source of information on this is coming from the mainstream media, understand that the mainstream media is government propaganda. The 2013 NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act, I believe, one is passed every year. Basically, that particular NDAA negated several laws that were on the books for years and years, decades, generations, that those old laws made it illegal for the American government to use propaganda against the American people. But the 2013 NDAA actually made it legal for the American government to use propaganda against the American people. It is legal for them to do that. Now, that's not to say that the government was never lying to us before 2013. We know that they certainly were about many things. Look into Operation Mockingbird. Mainstream media is government controlled propaganda. And you might be saying, well, I'm on Fox News. You know, that's reliable, surely. Fox News is what I call soft propaganda. Hard propaganda like CNN, they'll just lie outright. Fox News will mold conservatives' perception of the narrative by simply omitting facts. So you've got CNN, that's hard propaganda. You got Fox News, that's soft propaganda. And there's a few places where you can still try to get unbiased, real news, but it's getting harder and harder to find that as the establishment is actively trying to shut down and control those outlets. For example, Newsmax for a while was one of my go-tos, but they took sides and they started going in the wrong direction. They required all their employees to get the jab, and it just spiraled out of control. Now, let me say there's a few people here and there who still question the mainstream narrative. I honestly don't know where Tucker Carlson is 100%, what his motivations are, who he really stands for, but I like his stuff. He's at least questioning the mainstream propagandist narrative. And you should be too. But if you're getting only information from the mainstream media, you definitely have a warped perspective on pretty much everything. But and I say that in all kindness. I'm going to just show you some of the propaganda that's been going on. And let me just say, question everything, including me, because it's very possible that you know, that what have I've tapped into maybe propaganda. It's an information war. So I'm not saying that I have everything correct. I'm just saying danger. Think things through. Be careful. Don't let yourself be manipulated. Please don't let yourself be manipulated. We're going to cover some specific stories. Where it can be demonstrated that propaganda has been employed. So, for example, there's this account of Snake Island. So, according to the story, there's this Ukrainian garrison on this little island off Ukraine's coast. Russian warship rolls up on them and demands that they surrender. Their response was supposedly, "Go F yourself, Russian warship," at which point the Russians shelled the island and killed everybody. That's the story. Um, that story was propaganda. The Snake Island Ukrainian defenders, they actually surrendered to the Russian warship. I think there was more than 13 of them as well. And both Kiev and Moscow have confirmed that in the aftermath of that story. But even now, you can still find people who are being manipulated by this propaganda news story. There's a newspaper that I like and a website. They try to be an unbiased news outlet. called the Epoch Times. They have a website, they have a print newspaper. Um, but I noticed in one of their recent papers that they were running some opinion pieces by people who still were thinking that this whole Snake Island thing was news, and it's not. It was propaganda. It didn't happen that way, the way that you were told. And understand that. All right. Well, we'll pause there for a moment. Now, you know what? We'll just dive right into this. Where is this propaganda coming from? Well, in a lot of cases, it's from Ukrainian officials and politicians and news outlets. And they have a. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose behind the propaganda, what's going on with Ukraine, who, what is the Western establishment trying to push here. Um, anyway, so a lot of these outright lies are coming from Ukrainians. So at this point, I'm very skeptical of anything that comes from a Ukrainian politician or a Ukrainian news outlet because they've been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to have been lying to us on so many occasions now. But then this stuff's being parroted, or in some cases even originated by American officials, American politicians, and American intelligence outlets and persons. And then, of course, the American mainstream media, which is a reflection of whatever you want to call it, the establishment, the uniparty, the deep state, the powers that be. The agenda. Anyway, so we talked about Snake Island. There's a peripheral news story about this coming from the New York Post. And I actually, because the original story was so questionable, I actually questioned the veracity of this story too. So this particular website, the New York Post, it talks about the initial story. Then it talks about, well, the initial story was actually wrong, which is correct. At this point, Kiev and Moscow have both confirmed that the garrison there at Snake Island were taken into custody. And let's see where it was. Anyway, so this story is about how the ship that fired on that island has been destroyed, according to this story. But where was that coming from? Well, that was coming from uh, Ukrainian sources. Once again, Ukrainian military sources saying that their navy destroyed it. I don't know that there was great details. Okay, exchange of rockets. Possibly a missile fired by land-based Ukrainian forces defending the port city of Odessa. Um, Again, just be careful with this stuff. Ship was destroyed. It is confirmed. That sounds very official, but I'm not seeing any pictures of, a ship on fire, capsized, sinking. Uh, and this is coming from Ukraine. They're just trying to stir up this narrative that we're such great freedom fighters. We're doing so well against the Russians. Well, congrats, Ukraine, if that's the case. If your little children are and your women are killing a dozen Russian soldiers each, kudos to you. Why do you need the West? Is my question. But just be careful about this stuff. So we talked about Snake Island. There's another story going around that the Russian casualties were so great that they had to deploy these special mobile crematorium units to burn the bodies and hide evidence of their casualties. And this fake news story included pictures of these crematoriums. These actually aren't crematoriums. They're I mean, I guess they could be used as that, but they're in reality these are trash incinerators, mobile trash incinerators. And these pictures are old. They're from 2013. Another story. And it's put out there to make it look like the Russians are incompetent, that they're just being, mowed down left and right. Uh, no. Here's another one. Zelensky himself, who we're going to, well, I'll hold off. Anyway, Zelensky, he was trying to stir up this idea that the Russians were going to crack a nuclear plant and, is going to threaten all of Europe. And while there was shelling and a fire at one of the plants, and it appears that that exchange of fire happened when Ukrainians who were taking shelter at one of the plants fired on Russian forces, thus triggering a response, maybe even trying to intentionally get the Russians to, crack a reactor or whatever. Um, but Ukrainian sources were saying, let me see here. Yeah. Zelensky regime officials claimed they detected elevated levels of radiation and urged NATO to immediately institute a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which would immediately mean World War III. And that's absolutely true. You can't institute a no-fly zone without shooting down Russian planes, and that's open warfare. And Putin has said that is open warfare. Um. Anyway, but they lied. The Ukrainian regime lied. The International Atomic Energy Agency and the White House both fact checked these claims and reported that there was no radiation leak. Propaganda intended to con the West into getting involved in that situation. Uh, Here's another one. Scant evidence that he actually said, "I need ammo, not a ride." Quote was put out by a U.S. intel official. "I need ammo, not a ride" may well go in the annals of history as one of the greatest wartime quotes. But the Washington Post investigated it and found it could only be sourced to one anonymous senior American intelligence official. And the Washington Post is a leftist rag, so if they're even saying that this quote is not legit, then it's not legit. Oh, look. Rallying cries to fight an invading army, and these rallying cries never actually happen. Wow. All right. Here's another one. Fake news stories coming out of Ukraine. This one's going to talk about my particular favorite. So this one talks about Snake Island, I'm pretty sure. The number one that it talks about is the Ghost of Kiev. So supposedly there's this fighter pilot, the Ghost of Kiev, they're calling him, who downed 6 Russian jets in air-to-air combat in less than 2 days, making him like one of the, according to this, making him an official fighter ace and probably one of the fastest to ever earn that title. The problem is the Ghost of Kiev is completely made up. Completely made up. But the Russian establishment is still pushing this story. There was another official, Ukrainian official, who was saying after the fact, we don't have a specific identification for this guy. The Ghost of Kiev could be any of our brave fighter pilots. Propaganda. And this never happened. And, American politicians are getting punked, to put it in the words of the Gateway pundit, and conned into spreading this propaganda. There was footage actually shown, supposedly, of the Ghost of Kiev, but it was from a video game. And then this whole identifying him as Sam Hyde is it's an internet meme or whatever. Just propaganda. I think this one was relevant as well. Yeah, this was another big one. Kinzinger posted another tweet showing a picture of some children waving at soldiers. Yeah, it's a great picture. but it's not from the current conflict. It's from Gateway Pundit says we identified it from 2018, possibly older than that. Propaganda. Let's see what else. I don't know that we're gonna go into great detail on all this stuff. You can. I'm not gonna post links to all this either. This video is in high enough resolution that you should be able to look this stuff up on the original sources. I'll only post links to things that have been intentionally removed that I've had to re-upload and stuff like that. Yeah, there's a lot of these pictures of Ukrainian officials visiting the troops, etc. And there's this one regarding Zelensky. There was another regarding this particular former, I think he was a former PM. That these pictures are all old photo ops. Power station explosion, receiving hundreds of thousands of views, hundreds of accounts sharing it, major news networks covering it, but it's a chemical plant exploding in China in 2015. There's footage from video games, like this footage. This footage claiming to show Ukrainian ground forces downing Russian aircraft also went viral, but it's from a video game. There's other footage from a video game as well. That one's from Arma 3. There's a the Ghost of Kiev footage came from a video game. Let me think about that. Yeah, that video game was a really popular. The name of it slips my mind. It's a really good quality military flight sim. Forget the name of it. It's gonna bug me because I looked into that particular flight sim at one point. It looked pretty good. Um, and then they talk about Snake Island here. Yeah, propaganda everywhere. Um, this blacklisted news site just says, question all of it. The current Western propaganda for Ukraine is epic in scale. Um, Everyone has an agenda. Everything we are seeing in U.S. media surrounding U.S. interests in Ukraine is a massive propaganda operation with the headquarters in the U.S. State Department and U.S. intelligence community. The sense of sympathy you're feeling is part of an intentionally manipulative operation from within this D.C. matrix. The images, pictures, videos, speeches, sound bites, and cinematography broadcast by U.S. corporate media are all purposely intended to create a very specific outlook within the American people toward the issues in Ukraine. The leftist United Nations and the leftist U.S. State Department will work together on this just like they have done in the prior examples. Absolutely. And we'll talk about what they're trying to get us involved in, what they're trying to push us into. And now I'm not saying that, Russia is pure as the driven snow. Certainly the Russian government uses propaganda as well. We're going to talk about that. Um, we're going to talk about that. But there's definitely propaganda in the West too, so don't think that our mainstream media is giving you the straight story. Russian propaganda is the latest excuse to expand censorship. I'm concerned about Russian disinformation spreading online, so today I wrote to the CEOs of major tech companies to ask them to restrict the spread of Russian propaganda. He's talking about censorship. U.S. Senator Mark Warner tweeted on Friday. Since then, YouTube has announced that it has suppressed videos by Russian state media channels so that they'll be seen by fewer people in accordance with this openly acknowledged policy of algorithmically censoring unauthorized content. Google and Facebook Instagram parent company Meta both banned Russian state media from running ads and monetizing on their platforms. Twitter announced a pause on ads in both Russia and Ukraine. It's actually amazing to see how many companies have been militarized and are being involved in this conflict. Over 300 companies have stated their intentions to pull out of Russia or have already done so, including some big ones like Netflix or Coca-Cola or McDonald's. Yeah, these companies are politicized, weaponized. and they're taking sides in this. And that should be scary because what some of these organizations, yeah, so you have Elon Musk with his Starlink, just, you know, just deciding to go get involved and take Ukraine's side. Um, arguably, arguably the level of, at what point does it become an active war by America on Russia just because so many American companies are jumping in and taking part? I saw an article that thousands of Americans are thinking about going over to Ukraine and fighting for them. Um, hopefully, if that's you and you're on the fence about this, hopefully you'll see just how stupid that is by the end of this video once I've shared all the things I have to share with you. Um, you know, we, the American people, lost control of our own government a long time ago, and you're thinking about going over and fighting for the New World Order, basically, in Ukraine. That's just dumb. If you have a fighting spirit on that level, stay here and do what you can to, get involved in local militia. Start training your fellow citizens and waking them up and getting them ready to fight against totalitarianism here because we're in a little bit of a lull right now because we're coming up on the midterm elections, but tyranny is not going to just go away and expect it to come back in 2023 with a vengeance. You can quote me on that. Anyway, all these companies censoring Russia, and Russia has reciprocated and they're censoring the US and cutting us off. Runet, the Russian internet, is completely independent and can be isolated from the World Wide Web. Um, their first successful test to do this took place back in 2014, if I recall. And that was really good foresight on the part of Putin. I will give him that. Really good foresight. The Russians can just cut off the West, and their government basically controls the infrastructure of I think it's called Runet, the Russian internet. Anyway, RT America ceases productions and lays off most of its staff. That was the Russian response. We're cutting them off, they're cutting us off. The rift is growing. Never forget the same politicians calling for freedom and democracy. Democracy is a Pavlovian trigger word. The United States is not a democracy, it's a republic. It's always been a republic, it's never been a democracy. Democracy is a code word for the New World Order, and if whenever someone says democracy, democracy, that gets you all excited and motivated, you're being manipulated. Never forget the same politicians calling for freedom are now the ones who took yours away months ago. Remember the pandemic? Remember the election steal of 2020? I haven't forgotten. In case you haven't noticed, a line is being drawn in the sand. You either stand with Ukraine and unquestioningly parrot the establishment narrative, or you are an agent of the Kremlin. The war propaganda is palpable, and we haven't seen anything like this since the immediate aftermath of 9/11. While the media and your leaders are demanding that you take a side, it's important to remember that it is entirely possible to stand against the Russian invasion in Ukraine, as well as the folks who helped to instigate it. Well, anyway. So a lot of this stuff is on Blacklisted News. They've done so early on. Blacklisted News and the Gateway Pundit, they both posted some stories that were highly questionable. But then, within a couple days, they realized just how much propaganda was out there, and they've been doing a much better job of really sifting through stuff and being critical about what they post. And the Blacklisted News especially has done a great job of putting up a lot of articles exposing propaganda. I'd really encourage you to get on these sites if you're not already. Anyway, here's another good article. Defending freedom and democracy sure requires an awful lot of censorship. Yeah. If someone's lying to you or keeping the truth from you, it's for the purposes of manipulating you. In the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Latvia, speaking in support of the Russian invasion of Ukraine will get you years in prison. How about that? So much for free speech. Yeah, things are just getting out of hand. There are some countries now where they're talking about cutting off medical care for Russians. Think about that. You may have been, a Russian living in some other country, say Germany, for years and years, and you need to go to the hospital for something. They're just not going to do it, not going to help you because you're a Russian. This stuff is getting absolutely insane. Here's another story about that. Czechs could face 3 years in prison for supporting Russia on social media. Yay, free speech. Yay, democracy. Yay for the freedom in the West. Not. So DuckDuckGo was a big go-to for many truthers and people who were anti-censorship types. Well, um, I believe DuckDuckGo recently was acquired by Google. Don't quote me on that, but I think they were. Anyway, they're going to start doing the same things that Google does. Um, Google-style censorship scheme, not just of Russian disinformation, although although that's what was specifically said, I guess, in this announcement. DuckDuckGo CEO Gabriel Weinberg, yeah, on Wednesday announced the rollout of a new Google-style censorship scheme to downrank websites he says are associated with Russian disinformation. But they're also going to be suppressing websites that have dissenting views to the Great Reset, the New World Order, the leftist agenda, the uniparty Luciferian establishment. Race hustling leftists turn Ukraine war into ultra cringe virtue signaling woke fest. Yeah, I think this was about. No, this is something different. There was an article recently that I read somewhere. Maybe it was over on the Gateway Pundit. U.S. government's basically partnering with all these influencers on social media platforms, which also, by the way, is propaganda. These platforms exist for the purpose of harvesting your information and manipulating you. Um, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Anyway, the U.S. is establishment, the government. They're partnering with these influencers to get a pro-Ukraine message out there. For some reason, I was thinking this was that article. Maybe it is. Well, anyway, but that's going on too. Oh yeah, and the Pope's getting on this bandwagon too. Those of us in truther circles call him Bread Francis because he's a communist leaning one world government, Unitarian one world religious system proponent. Wonderful. Soros has made numerous statements saying that we need to take out the heads of China and Russia, and that we need to do everything in our power, we being the West, the United States, Europe, we need to do everything in our power to support Ukraine. YouTube is censoring a lot of stuff, including the Oliver Stone produced Ukraine on Fire documentary. It's on Rumble if you want to see it. I watched this a long time ago. Probably watch it again. Numerous revolutions in that country. Not going to talk about that in great detail. I think there's been at least 3 or 4 in my lifetime. Very divided place. Facebook and Instagram change hate speech rules to allow calls for violence against Russians. And it was also Facebook that they had blocked the Azov Battalion, the only official Nazi military unit in the world. They'd blocked them for a long time, but they temporarily unblocked the Azov Battalion so that people could encourage them, praise them, voice their support, and so that Azov, I guess, could as well, use the platform to stir up more pro-Ukraine propaganda, we're going to talk about the Azov Battalion a little bit here. Yeah, Facebook and Instagram are propaganda platforms, and that guy right there, he bought and sold the election in 2020. Mark Zuckerberg, what a scumbag. And, Russia's doing some of these same things too, so I'm not going to say that they're pure as the driven snow or anything. Russia introduced this law to jail sharers of misinformation for 15 years. This is what our world's become. Um, you know, the more society, someone put it this way: the more society removes um, God and the Bible out of things, the more these conflicts become evil versus evil. There's very little good versus evil struggles anymore. It's just evil versus evil. With the people always suffering and, being meat in that grinder. Um, so I think we've established really well, regardless of whether you agree with what I'm saying about we need to take a middle ground here and stay out of this conflict, whether you're, more pro-Russian, whether you're pro-Ukraine and think we ought to get involved there, or whether you were at the beginning of this video. I hope that this video, that where we are so far, I may combine this with some other stuff, or I may draw this out into a much longer video. I don't know yet. But I hope at this point that you can clearly see that propaganda is everywhere. I hope you can clearly see that because it's pretty self-evident if you're paying attention. I'm going to take a break now to put together the next part. What is the purpose behind Ukraine propaganda? What's going on? What are we being manipulated to do here? What's the purpose behind all this? And I think there are numerous purposes. I don't know how much detail we're going to cover in this, but anyway, taking a break now.